There you go, that's Donna Summer before there, Patsy Gallant. Let's talk about my guest of the show now. Webster Tarpley. He's written a book called 9/11 Synthetic Terror, and also George Bush. More importantly, he's doing a talk tonight in Bristol at the QEH Theatre in Jacobswell Road in the city. The talk is called From Guy Fawkes to 9/11, 400 Years of State-Sponsored Terrorism. And you are, and I've never heard this phrase before, a terrorologist.
Well, yes, I guess that's the phrase that has been applied by the managers of this tour,
Okay.
And I guess there is something to it, because what I try to study is, I'm a historian, but unfortunately because of the times we live in, you have to pay a lot of attention to state-sponsored synthetic terror, which is going on all around us, which is used to manipulate the world.
Well, let's talk about that, because we're often, and we've talked about it on this program before, we're often, a lot of people feel made to feel deliberately fearful of what's going on in society. And we kind of assume this is a fairly new thing. But I suppose what you're saying here, actually, there's nothing new about this at all.
No, it's not new. It's been going on for 400 years and really more than that. But in this case, because of Guy Fawkes, 402 years ago now, that was, of course, a state plot. That was state-sponsored terrorism. Guy Fawkes is simply the most famous patsy in world history. In other words, he's a useful idiot, a fanatic, psychotic, whatever he is.
Right.
Part of this clique of Catholic plotters, which had actually been assembled by Lord Robert Cecil, Salisbury, the Prime Minister of the country, right? Basically the controller of Queen Elizabeth, well, primarily James at this point, but the father had been the controller of Queen Elizabeth also. So Cecil was concerned. He wanted to make sure he stayed as Prime Minister. He wanted to make sure that Catholic repression went on, because they're always playing this dividing and conquering. You have to play one part of the population against another.
Right.
The Catholics are either a very large minority, or they may even be the majority. Nobody really knows, because it's all driven underground. So he also is interested in getting a war with Spain going as part of this idea of keeping himself in power. So what he does is he works through two patsies who are double agents. And one of them is Catesby, and the other one is Percy. These are parts of this group of 6 or 7 plotters. Right. So they're double agents, and they visit Cecil in his mansion at night. They're seen going in and out. So Fawkes is one who doesn't know what's going on. These other two think they know what's going on, but eventually they're going to get killed too. They're liquidated in the course of it. Right. And of course, basically after this you have 200 years of war, first with Spain, then you get Titus Oates and the Popish plot of 1678. That redirects it against France. Now, from there to today, 9/11, what is it? It's, of course, a provocation coming from the bowels of the CIA, the Pentagon, the National Security Agency, the only agencies that could create the effects you see. No air defense for 2 hours, controlled demolition of huge buildings, including Building 7, which was never hit by a plane.
We did have the caretaker of here on the show, actually, talking about that and how he witnessed what happened on
Cruise missile hits the Pentagon, airplane in Shanksville blown up in midair, essentially pulverized, or well, we don't really know. And all of that, of course, has to be done by the intelligence agencies. It's done.
The key question here is, though, if all this is true, and there are still many people who doubt what you're saying, of course, although I'm sure there are a lot of people equally who agree with what you're saying, why hasn't this been blown wide open? Why don't the American people actually call some sort of revolt here? Because clearly, if that is all true, there's been a huge, massive lie.
The latest best poll we have is that 50% of the U.S. population approximately believe the government is lying about some big thing. 25% believe the government is lying about 9/11 in totality.
Right.
16% believe the story. So the people are essentially with us. Who's not with us, of course, is the media, publishing, the government, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the universities, the institutions, which are oligarchical at the top, don't believe it, because there's an oligarchical consensus in favor of the idea that the only way to organize U.S. society and the world is around this absurd myth of terrorism, right? And the creation of a new enemy image to replace the Soviets, right? No more Soviets, no more communists. Therefore, you need Arabs, Muslims as the enemy image.
Why do you need an enemy image? Why do you need this fear?
It's what Orwell understood very well. Is if you want to have an unjust, hierarchical society with a completely irrational pecking order, you've got to have an external enemy that can always be used to justify the injustice that's going on economically, socially, on the inside, right? You were talking about politicians who ignore voters. Well, how can you do that? Well, you always say, we had a case that Bush's budget came out. He was cutting health, education, and welfare spending, and they asked the budget director, "Why are you cutting health, education, and welfare?" Because we have to fight the global war on terror. So it's a ready-made blanket excuse for every monstrosity that comes out of these reactionary thinkers.
Whatever you think about 9/11, and I think, you know, again, when we've done phone-ins on this program, lots of people think that there were a lot of highly suspicious things going on with 9/11, and I don't believe that the official story. But there is still, nevertheless, a threat out there, isn't there? We have to look at what's going on. Don't we have to look at what's going on in Iraq at the moment?
Well, no, I wouldn't look at it that way at all. Your threat right now is simply this. Cheney and the Cheney faction, desperate because of this world financial breakdown crisis, we're heading into dollar hyperinflation, we're heading into a worldwide banking panic, and you've seen the beginnings here.
Indeed.
We also had Countrywide Bank in California, Citibank, other big institutions, very big trouble on that line. The Cheney group, and when I say Cheney, I'm referring to a faction, not just this alcoholic guy who can't shoot straight with his 3 heart attacks and 4 pacemakers and a quadruple bypass, who's always scowling. The faction is determined to have a new 9/11. In other words, the real issue of 9/11 is the repeat performance. Give you a case in point. On the 29th and 30th of August, a B-52 intercontinental bomber was loaded with 6 nuclear cruise missiles.
Right.
Warhead about 150 kilotons, 6 or 7 times Hiroshima. Goes from North Dakota to Louisiana on the 30th of August. That's the jumping off point to do a direct bombing run into the Middle East to attack Iran. And that was the goal. Except, as far as we can tell, some Air Force personnel said, no, we don't accept illegal orders. These neocon fascist madmen are not going to make us into war criminals. And they said no. The plane came to a halt. The incident was announced on September 5th, the rogue B-52. Now, 6 of those people are now dead under very mysterious circumstances. 1 in July, but 5 after the case. A captain, a lieutenant, and a security man from the U.S. Air Force, dead in traffic accidents, a kind of grassy knoll in connection with these 2 things.
Okay.
1 of the cruise missiles is reported to be missing by Wayne Madsen, who is a very reputable internet columnist who has contacts in the National Security Agency. Now, we've been trying to get the Congress to investigate this, and the Congress refuses. It's been on the front page of the Washington Post, big picture above the fold, and the Congress won't make a move. Kucinich has promised, Kucinich being a left-wing congressman who's running for president, has promised to hold hearings, but so far there are no hearings. If I were the British government, I would call in the American ambassador and say, we want explanations about this rogue B-52. What are you doing? On the 6th, the Israelis attacked Syria. Was the B-52 going to be part of an Israeli attack on Syria and Iran? And then on October 17th, we had the unthinkable. The President of the United States threatens Russia with World War III, because that was the content of that speech by Bush. Putin had said on the 16th, don't attack Iran. It is unacceptable. Bush has come back the next day, World War III. Putin has demanded that the U.S. set a timetable to get out, and he has also said, he's compared Bush to a madman running around with a razor, like Freddy. That was for Halloween. And more recently, Putin has said, we are in an equivalent of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
But that's now passed over, though, hasn't it? We now don't.
No. This is
well, I feel,
live.
Again, if you look at the media here in the UK, we seem to get the impression that actually they've made up again and everything's okay now.
I think that's absurd. If the U.S. is determined to put these missiles into Poland, that is a Cuban Missile Crisis. The U.S. is also pressing for the independence of Kosovo under what amounts to an Islamic fundamentalist government of the KLA.
Tell me this, though. I mean, if all this is true, and if this conspiracy theory is continuing, and and if the American people are misled by the American media, and we know the American media are slightly unlike the British media, I think, although I think the sectors of the British media are getting there.